right now. And now it says an error occurred. Please try again later.
I'm gonna stand really still and not do anything like pick my nose just in case it's only
I
me live right now on YouTube.
I suspect we are live on YouTube, but maybe we should check because
I'll look.
it's
I'll
you
look.
look. It says we're not.
Yep,
It
we're
says
live.
we're live. Okay, and we're live. Haha! It is Monday, October 19th, 2020, 5:01 p.m. And I want you all to know that YouTube just lied to me. YouTube told me we were not live because an error has occurred. And I am convinced that that is active disinformation, that in fact we are live on YouTube, as well as on all of our other platforms. And I want to say this is the second major story of the day in which somebody did not realize that their camera was on, and said things that maybe not they would not have said had they known that their camera was on, or shown dog shirts that they might not have shown had they known their camera was on. The first one, of course, we're not going to talk about, but but for the grace of God go all of us who don't wear pants. As Dan Dresner tweeted today, this episode of Twitter Distraction is brought to you by pants. We're not allowed to have fun anymore. We are allowed to have pants, and you probably should wear them. But in lieu of fun, we have Kori Schake, who is also not here yet. I assume Kori is going to show up because it would be most unlike Kori to stand anybody up. Oh, wait, is that Kori Schake?
Yes,
Yes,
it is.
that is Kori Schake. See, it is equally as unlikely that Kori Schake would stand somebody up as it is that she would be prompt. Neither are within the normal state of being Kori Schake. And that is why.
I've been there.
You've been there?
Oh,
hello, Kori Schake.
Hi, Kori Schake.
Hello, my friends. What a joy to be in your company.
How are you?
You see this picture? Sorry. Anyways, you look just like Lily Tomlin mixed with Farrah Fawcett.
Okay,
That's
you know
what
what's
I
so?
think.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. You're actually the second person who's told me I look like Lily Tomlin. I find this fascinating.
But cuter.
But
More Farrah Fawcett.
way better than the answer I would have given myself. So I'm super happy about that. Plus, she was awesome.
I want to know, are you are back in D.C. now?
Yes, indeed.
And with 2 weeks to go before either the beginning of the dawn of the redemption or the pit opening up beneath us and swallowing us all up, how are you feeling?
So my sweet sister pointed out to me that the most popular TV show or streaming show in America is something about the floor being made out of lava, and it's hosted by a dog, and that feels like where
Japan over here.
It's hosted by my shirt.
That feels like what this moment feels like to me, right? So tragic that so many Americans are suffering, whether directly from the disease or from the economic or mental health consequences of it. So insane that our government has gone 10 months without a plan to fix this for us. So consequential, the choice before us, and both frightening at the militarization of voter intimidation and things like that, but also exciting to see people taking the election so seriously and lining up for hours on end. So it
So is
feels
that the dog
crazy.
host part? The dog host is like the tiny little ray of optimism of people getting ready to vote. Like, the rest of us just have to hang out in the lava. Uh,
Don't step on the floor lava. You need to jump from furniture to furniture.
All right. So much to talk about, but we got a request the other day, actually, for one Tamara Kaufman Wittes to appear on in lieu of fun to discuss reconstruction of the State Department. And I said, with all due respect to my esteemed wife, the person to discuss reconstructing the State Department is Kori Schake, because even before Donald Trump was a thing in the public imagination beyond, being the host of The Apprentice, she wrote a book about what to do about the State Department. And so my question is, how much of your book on the subject is mooted by this era, in the sense that the problems are so much bigger than they were when you wrote the book, that even getting back to the bad place that we were when you wrote it would be a titanic accomplishment? How much of it is accentuated by the current moment? That is, you were right for reasons you couldn't possibly have even imagined. And how much of the problem will take care of itself the moment Mike Pompeo and his scowling mug are swept out into the gutter in front on 23rd Street?
It's a fabulous and complex question, Ben. So let me take it in slices. The first is that there will be lots of easy opportunities for pickup if the Trump administration isn't reelected, right? Just the return to, not invoking the national security clause to invoke tariffs on Canada, for example, over steel, will do a lot to restore American diplomacy. And the activism of civil society and the decision of Americans that they want something different from what we have seen for the last 4 years will also be incredibly restorative for America. The third thing that I think will be important is that the things we need to do as a country to repair and rebuild and protect ourselves against the COVID pandemic will strengthen the sources of domestic power of the United States, and that to restore faith that the American government can do stuff well, and strengthen the bases of our domestic strength will also help repair America's diplomacy. But the second slice of your question is, you're exactly right that there are problems in American diplomacy that predate the Trump administration. And I wrote the book in 2010 or so, because I had gone to work in the Pentagon in my impressionable youth. I was 26 years old when I went to work as Colin Powell's NATO desk officer in the Joint Staff. And what I learned about the American military is mostly what they are great teachers, because the human capital of the military is the middle of the bell curve, and they have to design their personnel policies for the middle of the bell curve, right? They can't, if you have two geniuses in the Marine Corps, you don't change how you deal with the other 179,000 Marines. You need to deal with those two as an anomaly. And the institution of the American military thinks a lot about how to choose people who have the aptitude for what we need to do, how to train them and educate them to do it well, how to reward them for doing it well, how to promote them to jobs that will use additional talents of theirs. And when I got to the State Department as the deputy in policy planning in 2007, I was stunned at how great the human talent is in the Foreign Service and the civil service in the State Department, and what a shockingly bad job the institution does in making good use of it. And so I wrote the book looking at the deficiencies of just green eye shade management in the State Department. They don't need better people. They need better processes and better management, and also more money, but not just more money. So the example everybody likes to use of how to repair the State Department is that you need to create what's called a training float. Enough diplomats so that at any given time, 20% of them can be off learning new things, mastering new skills, doing an internship at Google, all that good stuff. Secretary Powell, Secretary Rice, and Secretary Clinton each gave an additional 1,000 Foreign Service officers for that purpose. None of them created a training float. The institution took hold of those additional people and programmed them out into embassies around the world. So it's not just a resource problem, it's a culture problem. And whereas in the Pentagon you have the deputy secretary whose job it is to make sure all the personnel and business practices stuff is working right, other than Jack Lieu for a brief 18 months or so before he went to OMB in the Obama administration, you don't have that senior management person in the State Department, and they really need it.
Kate?
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about this, because as a person who has studied the tech companies and the platforms and like the culture of creating some of these startups, one of the things that I have repeatedly told people as I've written researched some of the very brief history comparatively, like the last 20 or 30 years of how the institution came into being, how it like decided to do policy in this way or policy in that way. There is no institutional history at any of these companies. And in a company where you're pushed to move so fast and to do things so quickly and make all of these ad hoc decisions, things will just stay ad hoc and will continue being ad hoc, and we will keep making the same mistakes over and over again until like we as a society learn from it rather than we as this smaller entity learn from it. They will keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again until we kind of do something differently. And I've never gone to business school, and I don't know, I imagine you haven't, you might have, but I'm curious if there is what you kind of write about with the State Department here and what you describe with the military seems to be an ethos of like two very different cultures. And I contrast it again with a private corporation kind of ethos. But it does seem to be remarkably it seems to be the teacher thing is a great point, but like this idea of continuing to learn from your institution itself, that's what's implied with like the military idea, right? Is that everyone's constantly learning.
Yeah, and the model for learning in the Foreign Service is entirely mentoring. And first of all, that's intrinsically unfair, right? If you get assigned to a great ambassador who's going to invest in you, then you win the lottery. If you don't,
if you get assigned to Rick Grinnell, it's over.
It's over. Or you become a political actor rather than a diplomat. And so, whereas in the military, you spend 25 to 30% of your entire career getting trained and educated. And so that's why they get better with time. And in the State Department, the model is entirely mentorship. And they spend almost all of their training resources on language training. which on the one hand would seem like a good thing, but most American ambassadors couldn't do a televised debate in the language of the country they were in. So we're over optimizing to language when it's actually not mission essential. We're not making it the center of their skill
So
set.
so
And
what would be
moreover,
like history?
well, well, um, no, just for example, if instead of our model for diplomats being generalists, you go from a tour in Iraq to language school for 2 years, then to Mexico City for a tour, you could either specialize by region or by language. So you reduce the requirement for additional language education, or you could make it not their job. Or
Right.
you could add in additional training on management and budget and here are effective ways to deal with the Congress. My favorite example, I would love to see American diplomats study the question of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams were all ministers plenipotentiary to France during the American Revolution. Who was better at it and why? Right? Like every soldier I know can have an informed debate about Lee's tactics at Chancellorsville, but we don't think the practice, the history and the study of diplomacy is important for diplomats. And that's nuts.
All right, so I want to ask you to weigh the factors. These factors that you've just described were important enough to you when you came out of government in to write a book about. So they're obviously, they weigh heavily in your mind. Then you have layered on top of that the sort of deforestation of human trees at the State Department during this administration, which is, by all accounts, quite severe and involves sort of, not to mix a metaphor, but a decapitation strike against institutional memory. You know, people like George Kent and Masha Yovanovitch, right? People who have very long, serious foreign service careers. And then you have, relatedly, but also I think distinct, the crazed policies toward allies of the administration. And so if you were, say, Joe Biden's nominee to be Secretary of State, which is admittedly a little bit implausible for party reasons, and your job was to prioritize fixing the state, how to fix the State Department, where do those, like, how much of that is low-hanging fruit that you can just correct from, how much of it is real permanent damage from this administration or long-term damage, and how much of the problem is this underlying layer of the institution underperforming?
So the people of the Foreign and Civil Service in the State Department are so talented that encouraging and emboldening them will solve at least 40% of this problem. And policies will solve probably another 30%. So you got a good solid C minus just on those things alone. But the culture problem is deeper and harder to get at. And that's really a leadership problem. We tend not to choose secretaries of state as people who care about strengthening the institution, but we always pick secretaries of defense for that purpose. So we take for granted, we underestimate the tradecraft aspects of being good at diplomacy. And that cultural piece is going to take a lot of time and effort. Let me just give a couple of examples. So in the Trump administration, of the 52 politically appointed senior positions, 48 of them are white men, right? So
Right.
that's that sends a message to the institution. You could send a very different message to the institution by, making good on the LC Wins pledge that promised 50% of female participation in the administration. You could.
So for those of our audience who don't know about the LC Wins pledge, can you explain the reference?
Sure. It is a group that got together to encourage political campaigns in the primary season to commit to make their political appointments better reflect the United States in diversity. And they focused, in the initial phase, they focused on gender diversity. But as time has gone on, all of us have gotten a better appreciation that that's too narrow a perspective to take on it as well. So you could make a set of appointments that send important signals about the diversity. And also, instead of expecting diverse appointees to become like the institution, from a leadership perspective, you can force the institution to become like the diverse inputs. And let me just give you the example I hate the most, which is at the end of the Bush administration, in the State Department, we went through a drill of what would we want the State Department budget to be if we could get the president to agree to anything, right? Like, what would it be? And it was shocking how uncreative the personnel and management people were on this. And when we pushed them to consider, we need, why can't the head of information security at Google come in and run IT programs for the State Department? The answer of the assistant secretary or the undersecretary was, they don't understand how the State Department works. Not, we don't understand how effective IT works. It was, they need to bend to us. So that's a leadership issue about how you change the culture.
Right.
Before we go to questions, I'm just going to say really quickly, I've mentioned it on the show before, but one of my favorite quotes is from Bruce Schneier, who is a cyber tech expert and a leader in this field for a very long time. But he says, policy makers need to understand that technologists are capable of building worlds, and technologists need to understand that the worlds that they're building imply policy.
Oh, that's
and
great.
I think that is a very, like, I'm kind of butchering it slightly, but like that's just kind of this idea that you're getting at that seems like it's fascinating listening to this, how much it resonates. And I'm not in military, I've never been in military or whatever else, but you bring up like things that are just very human things that happen in like various types of. So I have a dorky question, very small, but I'm like, you said like diplomacy tradecraft, and my ears perked up. I was like, ooh, diplomacy tradecraft. It sounds like, I don't know, like very elegant tea parties with like secret messages in the cookies or something. I don't know, but I'm actually like wondering, like,
let me give you my favorite example. Because as you guys know, China is the world's biggest polluter, right? And if we are going to get our hands around climate destruction, we need to find a way to make the Chinese government care about and help us solve this problem. Parenthetically, we need to get our act together too, so obviously. But we also need China too. And when Governor Huntsman was ambassador to Beijing in the Obama administration, the embassy, for almost zero expenditure of US dollars, forced the Chinese government into accountability with its own public on climate change. And they did it by posting the air quality index in Beijing on the US Embassy website and tweeting it out every day. Chinese people care about the environment as well. And by providing transparency and information, we forced the Chinese government into better accountability. And it really moved the issue up their policy agenda. That's the tradecraft piece, right? Thinking about what are the tools available to us and how can we use them effectively to accomplish our country's interests.
Although I will also say that having been the beneficiary of a lot of good ambassadorial tea parties in Washington, I would not sell short Kate's point that, when I think of who are my favorite foreign diplomats in Washington, they are the ones who had really good dinner parties and knew how to put it together a really good conversation.
So one of the things I think Secretary Clinton did well when she was Secretary of State was she understood that most major policy decisions important to the United States are going to get made in Washington. And people are going to send their best diplomats to Washington, and thus creating the dinner parties Ben Wittes is so happy about. What American diplomats abroad can do, besides engagement with the government, but the thing they can only do overseas is engage civil society and engage publics and shape how they understand the United States and show that we care. Again, a fabulous example from a career diplomat. Robert Ford, when he was the U.S. ambassador in Syria at the start of the terrible Syrian I don't even want to say civil war because it's destruction by the government of its own country. Robert Ford went to dissident funerals. And that's way more important than anything else he was doing as ambassador, because what that told the people of Syria was what the United States thought about what the Syrian government was doing and what truths we hold to be self-evident about human rights.
That's exactly right. And, all jokes aside, the messaging that you can do is just so important when you do it well, and therefore it's so important when you don't do it well. So our first question comes from Madrigal, who has declined to be on screen, who asks, how hard will it be to mend fences with allies, and how would the new State Department go about doing it? Will it be difficult to clean house and root out the remaining Trumpists?
I don't think it will be very difficult to clean house because even though a whole bunch of Trump administration appointees are only acting. They're not Senate confirmed. So they go away in their mandate goes away on January 20th. I also don't think it'll be particularly difficult for inspectors general, or actually even for the career civil service and diplomatic service people to identify who went outside the boundaries of their professional mandates in a political way during the Trump administration, or worse, were engaged in corrupt activity or activity damaging to the national interest. I don't think that's going to be a particularly hard piece of it. In terms of repairing relations with allies, one of the things Americans should drop to our knees and be grateful for is the fact that America's friends understand that we have a higher risk tolerance than most other democracies, and we are very reckless with our own well-being on a number of occasions, and therefore, they will forgive us having elected Trump. I'm not sure they will forgive us having re-elected Trump. And
well, I won't either.
You already see some countries, like, for example, South Korea, begin to hedge against unreliability of of the United States decisions. Can you hold on for 1 second? I have to run get a computer cord. I'm about to die.
Okay. Well, we will now direct questions to Kori's empty chair while she's getting a cord. But and I will note that the fabric on that chair is awesome. Kate, do you have any questions for the empty chair? And Kate is muted. Kori is back. So we can't do any questions before Kori's headphones are back in because she can't hear us. But
Sorry about
Brett,
that.
I love the fabric on your chair.
Thank you.
Brad Grossman, the floor is yours.
Hi, Kori. Thank you for doing this today. When you have a significant chunk of people on the right, the people that exist only in the Fox News sphere, and they think of someone like Alexander Vindman as a traitor, how do we start to put the brakes on the politicization of the military and the foreign service? You know, I've got my tier of optimism on, and am hopeful that things will snap back post-Trump, but I don't know.
So it's a great question, a hugely consequential question. And leadership attitudes actually really matter a lot. Most of civil military relations aren't governed by law, they're governed by norm. And so what the leadership chooses to do, how they talk about things, the symbolic choices they make. I mean, just think, for example, how different the White House feels now because of the enormous barricades around it. If those were taken down, it would be a huge symbolic symbol. And it would change how we think about and talk about those things. And you're right that the atomization of media makes this a particularly challenging time to do it. But one of the things I know as a historian is that there are frequently periods of huge technological upheaval, and we always worry that jobs are going to go away, that the political system is incapable of finding regulatory or legal ways to tame things, but we actually do. And this feels hard right now because it's happening in real time and we're in the middle of the stream. But if you follow the work of, of people who look at polarization in American politics, there are lots of creative ways that a leader who actually cared about unifying the country, in the way that we have challenged every other president besides Donald Trump to do. And my guess is that the election looks likely to produce an outcome which demonstrates people are yearning for it, and that'll help too. So I'm actually quite optimistic that this is reversible. But Ben, you thought deeply about this question. What do you think about that?
I think it is reversible, but that is not to say that it will be reversed. So I think one possibility is that if Donald Trump is defeated in the kind of magnitude that I think we're all hoping for, the lesson that people will take away from this is you can stomp on norms and get away with it for short periods of time. But in the long run, people actually like the continuity of the way we do business. And that includes the non-politicization of things that are not traditionally political. And that there's no good reason why disagreeing about marginal tax rates or abortion should imply disagreement about what to do in Syria. And that, the traditional idea that foreign policy is, while not a political exercise, it's not a non-political exercise, it's not a partisan political exercise, makes an intuitive sense to people, and if you dance on the grave of that principle long enough, eventually people are going to hate you. And so I could totally see an environment in which, you know, line up those list of things and say the lesson of Joe Biden's defeat of Donald Trump is, you know, politicize the FBI and the Justice Department and the military and the State Department at your peril. I could also see an environment in which Trump gets pretty close to winning or wins, and the lesson that people will take about that will be, okay, you know, maybe we should have done it a little more gracefully. You know, I don't trust Tom Cotton to get the right, you know, to take the right lesson from this. And so I think who wins the battle for the soul of the Republican Party probably matters a lot in terms of what lesson the party takes from it. And also how, like, I do think in the long run, if you have one party that doesn't believe in the depoliticization of civil service, foreign service, military service, that's a bad environment, because in a two-party system, both parties win sometimes. So I'm not optimistic. I just see it as a very conditional and contingent kind of question.
Can I ask, and so this is like, I want to go to back to questions, but I'm curious for both of you, like how you feel about, we keep talking about this, and I completely agree with Kori, obviously, about norms and and how these things are set. But what I'm curious about is like, is this not, and I don't actually think that I'm one of the realists who believe that like the founding fathers picked 4 years, and like I don't think they understood how long 4 years could be, and I don't think that they understood how short 4 years could be. But that being said, in the stage of human development, like I have to say, Kori, I really wonder like how much norms can change in 4 years, but I do really think they can change in 8 years. And if you have constructive kind of like almost a decade of people that are like given some type, and that is what is implied to me by when people always say mandate, like we had this, like the actual like definition of the term. But to carry an idea through for not one but 2 terms actually seems to be the type of thing that can really stage a complete transformation. And I don't know if you agree with that. And I just was like thinking about this, like, because as Ben was saying, like, who knows what's going to happen to Trump, but like, if he's voted out, maybe the changes that he's put into place, whatever they might be, are foreshortened, and they don't become norms, and they don't become like, you know, they don't become whatever, right?
I think that's right. And that's why the election matters so much, because you are either choosing to reinforce or repudiate what has been on display for the last 3.5 years. And if the president gets reelected, it will be us saying this is okay. It's okay to politicize the FBI and the military and our diplomatic engagement. And if he's repudiated, there will be a strong pressure to repudiate those policy or those behaviors. But I also agree with you that 4 years, American institutions have held up really well, including independent journalism has held up really well, despite a full onslaught by the president and his people. But 8 years is a lot longer, more difficult challenge.
Daniel, the floor is yours.
So I'd be curious in what you think the 3 hardest foreign policy challenges that the Biden administration would face. And what is the probability or risk assessment you'd give for facing a major foreign policy crisis during the transition?
Okay, two super hard questions. The first one, three hardest challenges. Um, uh, hmm. One would be North Korea because their Kim Jong Un is restless, as the 75th anniversary parade showed, and the Trump administration gave them 4 years to continue building ICBMs and nuclear weapons. And there are no real good options for what to do about it. And so it's hard to make a strong non-proliferation stand without undercutting all sorts of other policies. So that's a hard one to figure out. Getting the balance right on China, given uh, given that a rising China doesn't appear to be liberalizing, and trying to find ways to bring allies along, because of course China isn't just rising for the United States, it's rising for America's allies too. And the with us or against us kind of approach that the Trump administration has taken, coupled with the pusillanimity of the president's own behavior towards Xi Jinping, saying that we don't care about Hong Kong and we don't care about Uyghur internment camps, bringing that policy back into alignment and on a sensible basis of resourcing, I think would be my second hard challenge. And the third hard challenge would be making up for the lost opportunities for North American consolidation. The deepening of relationships with Canada and Mexico to create a common energy grid, to create a common transit of people, both high-skilled and low-skilled workers across the three countries. There's so many ways to move supply chains to the reliable proximity of our great neighbors. There's so many opportunities there that we are missing that would position us to be in a much stronger international position in so many ways. But President Trump's behavior has damaged those relationships deeply. So those would be the three. Priorities I would pick. What was the second question?
How worried are you about a major foreign policy crisis during a transition?
I am. Let's see. I think there is a 5 in 10 probability that President Trump does something demonstrative and dangerous in between the election and what I fervently hope will be the end of his presidency. I think it unlikely that another country would choose the moment of transition because of the expectation that everybody's going to want to try and find different, every American president who gets newly elected can reset every relationship, and they ought always to take the opportunity to do it where they can, because it's one of the advantages of our system. But I think most other countries, in particular the strongest countries, China, our European allies, are going to hope for positive change in the relationship, greater predictability, greater reliability. Russia, I think, would be the big outlier, which may see the end. I'm myself not entirely convinced that even though Trump is himself shockingly, disgracefully pro-Putin, I'm not sure the Trump administration has been good for Russia. Because the choices Russia has made, poisoning Navalny, the Skripal poisoning, they have convinced everybody that they're the bad guys. But having an administration that has a coherent Russia policy is something that they can count on after a Trump administration.
Andy McCurdy, the floor is yours.
Awesome. So do you see any signs that Joe Biden will do a good job reforming the State Department? And what do you think of his team of advisors and their experience in the topic and foreign policy generally? And I'm aware that you share the same opinions as Bob Gates on Joe Biden. So, but like they don't have Ben Rhodes yet, so that could also be
I
positive.
do think Joe Biden is not particularly good on foreign and defense policy, and I am enthusiastically voting for him. So there it is. No, I don't think they will particularly care about strengthening the State Department, because it's something that people very often talk about. You know, they want the good governance tiara while they're out of office, but once you're taking office, you actually have real-time problems to solve. And because the State Department structurally doesn't have a way to grapple with these big issues of institutional change, there will be a strong incentive in the Biden administration, as in every other administration, not to make the structural and cultural changes that it needs. That said, I am reliably informed the Biden administration has over 2,000 people engaged in its foreign and defense policy team.
And it's taking all of their advice extremely seriously.
I know and respect about 1,800 of them, and so I think they'll be fine.
So do you think there's any prospect for any of the particularly likely candidates for Secretary of State to take the reform agenda terribly seriously, or are some of them more probable than others in your view? And like, are there any of them people who you think of as kind of comrades in arms in the State Department reform discussions?
So I can think of two very long shot candidates to be Secretary of State who would take the reform issues seriously. And those would be Pete Buttigieg and Mitt Romney, because both of them come out of the business consulting world. So they would look at an institution so underperforming its human capital, and it would be a professional insult to them. But I also think it pretty unlikely that either of the two of them will be Secretary of State.
Although I think Pete Buttigieg is going to get something big, given how he has, speaking of underperforming, speaking of how seeing as how his overperformance on the campaign trail on behalf of the ticket. Christopher.
Hi, Kori. We miss you. We miss having you here in London. I will try to combine my two questions into one, or maybe. First would be, do you think that it's time to scrap the office of Director of National Intelligence and go back to a CIA-led intel community? And how do you think that the ship has sailed on the interagency process in terms of running policy out of the NSC and the White House and disempowering the departments and agencies? And because you're red reminds me of your Cardinals fandom, can you get your World Series pick, Dodgers or Braves?
So first, to the most important national security question of the day, who will win the World Series now that tragically my St. Louis Cardinals are not in contention? I think the Dodgers are unbeatable. They are just
So
playing.
You're a National League fan always? Have you always been a National League fan?
No, I grew up an Oakland A's fan in the Charlie Finley Go-Go days.
See, I grew up a Red Sox fan in like the 1986. Yeah, exactly, the Bill Buckner days, and then it changed after 2003. But I always had this argument with my dad, which I was like, I kind of think that from a first principle standpoint, I'm kind of a National League fan. I don't believe in the designated hitter.
But that's one of the tragedies of the COVID pandemic. which is that the National League has agreed to adopt the designated hitter, which is
I didn't see that. Is that true?
it's a
Wow, that's
travesty.
crazy. Oh
It's
my
a
God.
travesty.
Oh my God.
So
Okay,
back to Chris's
sorry,
other
Emily,
question.
sorry. That was my fault.
Back to Chris's other questions.
John Bordeaux is trolling us with his Mets hat, but yes.
um, Chris, remind me of your questions again. Now I went so far down the rabbit hole about National League Baseball.
Do you think the DNI should go?
So I would not be sorry to see the Office of the Director of National Intelligence disestablished, but it would only be second on my list. I think the Department of Homeland Security should be disestablished. I think it has...
Speaking of institutional underperformance,
but
no, I don't know about this.
And the creation.
Can you say more, like, in all of it? Because, like, as a person who's not a NatTech person, like, just say more.
Sure. So in the George W. Bush administration, the all sorts of 17 different agencies and departments were put together into the Department of Homeland Security. You may remember Kristen Nielsen running it in the Trump administration. And so immigration went there, border control went there, all sorts of pieces went there. And the result, even before the Trump administration, the result was a securitization of policies that don't, like immigration, that have bigger, broader, connections than just their security element. So it cast a security pall over things that are also about culture and about the economy and about education. But I think in particular, the performance of DHS in the Trump administration has so disparaged its potential utility that I think it ought to just be disestablished.
I agree with you. I think it was a worthy experiment, and it's an experiment that failed, and I felt that way even before they started filing intelligence reports on me. John Bordeaux, speaking of the Department of Homeland Security, the floor is yours.
Good to see you again, Kori. Hi, it's been a long time.
Hello, my friend.
Hi, it's been a very long time. So I was surprised to hear you say that Pete Buttigieg and Mitt Romney would be good choices because of their consulting background, because we can remember what Rex Tillerson tried to do with consultants and how well McKinsey performed. But I take your point that a reformation is needed. I guess my question is, which cabinet position and/or advisory position would you accept in the Biden administration? I assume DHS is still on the table.
I am very much looking forward to helping the Republican Party once again become a group of people serious-minded about national security. So I think the 2,000 folks already on the Biden team are going to do just fine for the country. They have no need of my particular talents.
Kori can be appointed the State Department's special envoy to the Republican Party. Alice Lee, the floor is yours. You are in the dark.
Okay. Yeah, changing seasons. Is one of my questions more interesting than the other?
Do them both. Throw them both out there, and Kori will talk about whichever one she wants.
Okay, so my first question is your comments on military training being kind of a lifelong thing instead of just something that you crammed in at the beginning. I'm wondering if that's something that you could apply to kind of modernize public education before college. And then my second question is, just anecdotally, as someone who went to Tufts and graduated in 2017, a lot of people who were interested in national security and international relations suddenly stopped considering the State Department. So I'm wondering if you think there's a kind of pipeline problem because of the just the lack of morale that's been happening recently.
Yeah, they joined Antifa instead.
There's definitely a pipeline problem, but it's also an easy pipeline problem to solve. You have 3 years, flood the zone, and you'll only have a big incoming class in 2022 or 2021. So in 4 years, there's not that much damage. Moreover, there are lots of ways to be an important force in American foreign policy outside of the American government. One of the things I love best about our country is how porous the government decision-making process is to ideas and to energy from civil society. And so, go to work for the Hewlett Foundation, thinking seriously about cyber, and then the government will have to respond to your good ideas. There are lots and lots and lots of ways to do this. Join the Marine Corps, by the way. Join the CIA, because the State Department's not the only institution that needs rebuilding after the depredations of the Trump administration. So I realized how discouraging it had to be to have spent a lot of time and effort studying an issue and then find the career trajectory that you imagined for yourself foreclosed. But my career is living proof that you can run your ship aground more than once and get yourself seaworthy again. So go ahead and take the Foreign Service exam this year, be at the front of the line, and change diplomacy in America.
Can I just add something really quickly there that I love everything you just said, Kori, but I also just kind of want to say that I totally identify with what Alice just said. I think that we're probably pretty close in age, and there's a real hardship in engaging in let's say that my generation came about when I was in high school and taking AP American history and learning my civics and doing everything and deciding what I wanted to be. There was the West Wing, and I know this shouldn't have it's just a show, but it was the West Wing, and and there was this ideal of government government is this it seemed to make sense. It was a way to change the world. And I would say that by the time I graduated from college, the way to change the world wasn't really government, until I think Obama, but people left Obama to go into tech companies or to go into other types of things and thought that basically the next way to change the world was not just government, but these technology companies. And I just kind of wonder what you think about that, because I think that I don't know. It's a hard line between some of this stuff, in terms of how we kind of come to understand it as we're living it.
Yeah, history's a lot more fun when you're not living it. Yeah. The great historian David McCullough, I was at a talk he gave once, and he said the challenge of being a historian is never forgetting that people don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
Right? People living it don't see the trajectory, because it's like Stephen Jay Gould's theory of contingent evolution. We think we see a straight line because we see the starting point and the end point, but there were all sorts of unique choices along the way that would have changed it. And the uncertainty and the enervation right now, I think, Melissa, especially for people your age, right, who come of age after September 11th, come on the job market after the 2008 financial crisis, and now have this. What Jim Mattis and I noticed in the data that we collected, the surveys of public attitudes we collected for warriors and citizens, the biggest outlier was that the attitudes of people under 25 were closest to the attitudes of people who had lived through the Great Depression and World War II, because both the economy and their security felt incredibly uncertain.
Yeah.
And I think that's the lived experience of it now.
So we're going to give the last question to Ian, whom
Hi
I
again,
believe
Ian.
you know,
Yay,
Kori.
Ian! So nice to see you, my friend.
Hey, Kori. Long time no see.
That's a terrible
Greeting from
hat.
across the street from an empty Nats
That's
Park.
a terrible hat.
Well, here's the
Don't
thing.
let her talk to you like
somewhere,
that, Ian.
somewhere in. Well, I'll hold it hostage, but somewhere in my apartment is a Cardinals, Nationals, NLCS hat that is all Kori's because I don't need it because we won a World Series. So I was going to ask for a baseball prediction, and then I was going to definitely put $10 on whoever you were going to pick. But I was. It might not be. It might. I'm going to pivot to a question of. You talked a lot about norms and how hard it's going to be. That's like the unsaid things that are going to be that much harder to teach. Is there any country that does this particularly well? Like instills in their State Department Corps, their civil servants, like from the get-go, these are the norms that we adhere to, and it tends to work out pretty well.
Okay, that is a fantastic
Yeah,
question.
that's a phenomenal question.
That
What a
I
good
am
question.
ashamed of myself. I do not know the answer to, Ian.
But now I kind of want to reframe my entire life in keeping with this question.
But that's a great. It's a great research
Ian,
question.
But
Great
Ian,
policy planning question.
but I missed it because I was scanning the other questions. So can you restate it for me?
Is there a country that teaches norms particularly well? Like from the outset of their civil service, they adhere to norms and they get it and they know how to teach new people.
It seems like a Finland thing to me.
Yeah, that
Seems like a Germany thing to me.
Yeah, it seems like a Sweden thing to me. And I was going to say that, that's kind of a Finland thing, like Ben said. But I was also going to say, I have a problem with the idea of teaching norms versus, I don't think that they're, taught. I think that they're understood and dialogued about, but, I don't feel like there's a top-down teaching of them. Do you disagree, Kori?
No, Kate, I was going to roll in support of you because I used to have this argument at West Point all of the time when I was teaching there, because West Point prides itself on producing leaders. And I think that is a profoundly mistaken understanding, both of their success and their failure. No less a source than Ralph Waldo Emerson. Was it Emerson or was it Whitman? I think it was Whitman. So it's Whitman.
Transcendental fuckers. It doesn't matter. Whatever.
Whitman says that wisdom cannot be passed from one who has it to one who doesn't.
Yes.
And I think the same is true about leadership, and I think the same is true about normative value. That we can model it, we can select people for sensitivity to it or possession of it, but I'm not sure in any of those three cases you can actually teach it. You can only refine and reward it if it's already there.
We're going to leave it there with a statement of wisdom from Kori Schake.
Oh my gosh, Kori, I'm so glad we're gonna write it up, and now I'm gonna publish a book about it's going to be a little tiny illustrated version of 10 lessons about norms from Kori Schake, and it's going to be
it's going to be called "You Can't Fucking Teach Them."
fucking teach them.
My friends, thank you so much for the pleasure of this conversation with you. And
I'm going to say one more thing that will be of great interest to the In Lieu of Fun audience. My sign off to guests. Guest's name, comma, you're a great American, is stolen from Kori Schake, who often signs off that way in conversations with people. She'll say casually, it's great to see you. You've brought joy to my heart and you're a great American, or something like that. And that is where I got it. So I feel ridiculous saying it to you. But Kori Schake, it warms my soul to have you on In Lieu of Fun. You're a great American. And we will be back tomorrow with who's on tomorrow? Is Tuesday's our blank day? We don't have anybody, right?
Tuesday's our blank day. But I will just say, Kori, thank you so much for coming. I feel like I just had I don't know. I just feel like I just like had a dialogue with A.A. Milne or something. I feel like Winnie the Pooh and a little bit of Eeyore, and there was like all this stuff and the 100-Acre Wood, and let's think about it in the long term. And anyway,
you just made my year, Kate. Thank you, my friends. It's
Hey,
been a joy.
tell your sister to be our guest tomorrow. We should do like Schocky sisters in sequence.
I don't know who it is, but that would be awesome. Yeah.
So what you
it's the
found
great
out,
Christina
Kate,
Schocky.
I am not even the talent in the Schocky family. I'm only the runner-up.
I think it's kind of a tie. We will be
Thank you
back
for that.
tomorrow, 22 hours and 55 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we have a declining
American
State
League.
Department that we
The
can
American
revive.
The American League.
We have a designated hitter rule.
God
Bye.
damn it.
Shame.
No, we don't,
Shame.
apparently. Anyway.
Shame.